invite you to visit our newest exhibit at Neenah's Octagon House, Tracing Our Paths, Neenah's Immigration Stories. This exhibit was created to help us all understand and appreciate the immigrant history of our great community from its earliest days up to the present. You'll discover some familiar names in the exhibit, like Kruger, Bergstrom, and Jerseld, but you'll also discover some stories of individuals who made more recent contributions to Neenah, like the Joshi family from India, and Zhang Yang, a Neenah Menasha fire rescue firefighter, and one of only 2 Hmong firefighters in the state. There's so much to do and discover in this brand new exhibit, so we hope you'll visit us beginning on May 9th from noon to 3. And more details of both of the events I mentioned and then our newest exhibit are available on our website, NeenahHistoricalSociety.com, and also on our Facebook page. So you'll find everything about those events there with more detailed information. So I encourage you to visit our website or our Facebook page. So with that, I would like to introduce our speaker for the evening. Dr. Jennifer Haas serves as Acting Director and Principal Investigator at the Archaeological Research Laboratory Center at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. She received her doctorate in anthropology from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, a Master of Arts in Anthropology from the University of South Carolina, with undergraduate degrees in anthropology and history from Marquette University. Her research focuses on the archaeology of the Midwest and Great Lakes regions, as well as historic preservation. She is a specialist in paleoethnobotany and ceramic analysis. Haas further serves as a gubernatorial appointee to the Wisconsin Burial Sites Preservation Board and is a board member for the Wisconsin Archaeological Survey. I had the pleasure of meeting Dr. Haas while she was investigating the Lakeshore Avenue site, and it was truly such a great opportunity to see archaeological field work being conducted in our own community. I'm really looking forward to hearing more about that process and what was discovered by the team, and I'm sure you are as well. So I'll say welcome and to Dr. Haas, and thank you for being willing to share your expertise with us.
Okay, thank you. And now I'm going to struggle and share my screen and hopefully get the right one here. And all right, so hopefully you see, now I can no longer see anything. So I'm hoping that you can see the slides. Yes?
Nope, I'm not seeing the slides.
Okay, let's see here. Hold on. Give me a minute to. Well, let me do it this way. When I shift to the slideshow, I can't see anything, and then you guys are not seeing it. So I wonder if I can quickly do something here. Just bear with me on the technology.
No problem.
So we'll try it this way here. I'm getting there, struggling between both of my monitors to get the right stuff shown here.
We did have a question for Megan. Does Dr. Haas have permission to share her screen?
Yes, she does. Yep.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank
Oh,
you.
there we
Neenah.
go.
That's a good point.
Now do you see?
There we go.
Slide?
Thank you.
Okay. Yay. So this will be a little challenging. I'll have to kind of look in two different places here, but okay. So first of all, sorry about that. Thank you for asking me to come and talk to your group about archaeology and the work that myself and my team conducted last summer and fall along Lakeshore Avenue for the city of Neenah. I want to first cover some regional context. I'll talk a little bit about the project, and then I'll discuss some of our preliminary findings. And I do believe there is time at the end for a few questions. Okay. So I want to start out by providing some regional and historical context. This, I hope, will allow for an understanding of the significance of the archaeological sites identified on Neenah Point. In a regional perspective, Neenah Point is part of the Middle Fox River Passageway, a river and lake network that links the Great Lakes to the Mississippi River Valley via a portage between the Upper Fox and Wisconsin rivers, of course, at the present day city of Portage. Populations and trade networks moved goods and ideas and human groups themselves over considerable distances using this network.
I'm sorry, I have to interrupt. Somebody is now saying that they can't see your slides. And I'm not actually seeing what I think are your slides. I'm seeing a different screen.
Okay. So
I'm sorry.
That's okay. Let's figure this out. Maybe instead of chatting before the meeting, we could have,
Absolutely.
we should have figured this out. Okay, so let's.
That's your screen, I see, but I don't see your presentation slides. I only see your, like your background
or something. Yeah, and now I've kind of lost. Oh my gosh. Now I can't get to anything.
Oh dear.
Oh dear. Okay, we'll get there. I'm having. Let's just give me a second here. I'm gonna turn. Yeah, I lost all the controls for Zoom. So any insight would be great on that.
I believe if you,
or if I want to just.
if you hold down Alt and Tab, I believe the controls will pop up, but I know it's a little weird when you're sharing your screen. It's challenging to get the screen.
Yeah, I wonder if I turn off a screen.
Yeah, do you want to start it again?
See if I can get that.
Yeah.
I see it now.
Yeah, I can't get to it.
Oh,
Let me.
there we go.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, so I don't know. What are you seeing now?
Now we're seeing your presentation not in slideshow mode.
Okay. So now if I do, let's see. Oh gosh, I'm almost afraid to do this.
Yes, it looks
Okay.
good to me. I hope it looks good to everybody.
Get feedback from the audience.
Yeah, I think it looks.
Okay, somebody said there it is. Thanks. So I think we're okay.
Yay, technology. So
great.
for the record, my virtual platform that I use is Teams. So I'm not that familiar with Zoom. Okay, so we'll dive back in. I'm giving you guys some regional context on the archaeology of the region, and we're talking about the Middle Fox River Passageway. So archaeological research has basically continued almost unabated in the Middle Fox River Passageway from the time when the Menominee and Ho-Chunk settlements flanked its shores to present times. Collectively, these studies demonstrate that the locality is one of extremely densely concentrated archaeological sites, which span occupation from Paleo-Indian times, so roughly 12,000 years ago, to historic times when known villages and settlements were occupied by the Menominee, Ho-Chunk, Potawatomi, Fox, Sauk, Kickapoo, Oneida, Stockbridge, Munsee, Huron, Ottawa, Ojibwe, and Iowa during the 17th and 19th centuries. The waterway itself was undoubtedly a key variable in concentrating populations at various strategic locations in this extensive network. The high resource density, including wild rice, fisheries, waterfowl, and upland game, has also been cited as a variable contributing to prehistoric and historic period occupation of this region. Historic documents and archaeological surveys have recorded hundreds of archaeological sites in the region. For Neenah Point and nearby Doty Island, archaeological sites were documented by Publius Lawson in the early 1900s, and I've shown one of his maps. It's in the middle part of the slide shown here. Early historic documents also provide evidence of Neenah Point as being used as a Native American village. It's the Black Wolf Village shown on the map from 1835 on the right. And then also the General Land Office maps show the Winnebago Rapids Mission that was established there in the area between 1834 to 1836. Given its strategic location at the confluence of Lake Winnebago with the lower Fox River, both Doty Island and Neenah Point were likely choices for habitation long prior to any historically documented occupation. Notably, in the 1900s, Publius Lawson initially described the archaeological features of Doty Island, noting the presence of a stockade embankment, cornfields, garden beds, stone heaps, and effigy mounds. Lawson also indicated that Doty Island was a principal historic period Ho-Chunk village. However, we know that many archaeological sites in this area have been damaged or destroyed owing to historic and modern land use practices, that is, intensive agricultural practices, as well as recreational, commercial, and residential development within the city of Neenah. Research, however, over the past several decades has demonstrated the potential for archaeological deposits to remain preserved within the city of Neenah. Fortunately, some archaeological sites or portions of sites remain intact beneath a fill deposit that has effectively encapsulated or protected the sites, or at least portions of the site. I suspect that this fill may be related to early attempts to raise the land when the dam was built in the 1850s. This would have raised the water levels of Lake Winnebago. So in addition to the current study we have done at Lakeshore Avenue in the late 1980s, sewer utility installation between Adela Beach and Ricker Bay identified an extensive Oneota Village. We'll talk about that, what it means a little bit later. And then also in the 2000s, the expansion of the Neenah Waterworks facility encountered archaeological deposits, including part of a cemetery that is likely associated with that 1834 to 1836 mission. So prior to our archaeological work along Lakeshore Avenue, previous archaeological studies have been completed in Neenah Point, in Riverside and Kimberly Point parks. In the early 1990s, archaeological survey was conducted in a portion of Riverside Park, identifying woodland era pottery, as well as a few copper artifacts, worked bone artifacts. Notably, the materials from the park area were recovered from an area that showed minimal disturbance. Work completed more recently by our group in 2019, it's not related to Lakeshore Avenue project, did identify that indeed a shallow fill deposit in the park area covered intact soils in at least some areas of the park. Portions of Kimberly Point Park were investigated also in the 1990s. This work again yielded evidence of late woodland pottery, chert flakes, and a broken celt. And here at Kimberly Point Park, a fill deposit was observed between the roadway and the lake with a note at that time that intact soils, containing archaeological materials were likely to be present. In 2019, UWM conducted work in Kimberly Point Park related to an underground utility project. And this work identified several cultural features beneath the fill deposit at the north end of the Lakeshore Avenue Park area. And that work is shown here in the upper right slide, obviously done in the late part of the fall, given the snow. This work, as well as studies completed on Doty Island, have demonstrated that the area of Neenah Point and Doty Island were the locations of late prehistoric period villages related to what archaeologists recognize as two distinct groups, people of the late woodland tradition and the Oneota. So late woodland is how archaeologists describe some of the populations in eastern Wisconsin that lived here from about 8700 to 8200. Late woodland people are known from their large habitation sites, typically located along wetlands and waterways that were occupied for most of the year. They grew corn and also relied on a wide variety of wild plant and animal resources. They are recognized archaeologically by their distinctive ceramic technologies. These ceramic jars were manufactured with a grit temper and decorated with fabric and/or cord impressions. Some ceramic jars have a thickened band around the rim called a collar. So I've shown that here in the center part of the slide. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk about Lakeshore Avenue. And also notably, the late woodland populations are understood to be the makers of effigy mounds, which are found throughout southern Wisconsin. People of the Oneota tradition are recognized archaeologically beginning about 1,000 years ago. Evidence of these populations is found throughout much of the Midwestern United States, including Michigan, Illinois, Indiana, Missouri, Iowa, Minnesota, Wisconsin. Oneota settlements are large permanent village farming communities. These populations were reliant on corn, squash, and beans, although a variety of wild plant and animal resources also remain important. Oneota are considered to be more sedentary as compared to late woodland populations. Oneota sites are recognized by their distinctive pottery types with distinctive decorations, and their pottery tends to be tempered with crushed shell rather than grit as the late woodland pottery is. By AD 1000, a pattern of stable permanent Oneota villages were present in the Neenah region. Between about 1200 and 1400 AD, a major demographic shift occurs, and Oneota sites become densely clustered in a core zone along the Lake Winnebago chain. With few exceptions, these large Oneota villages were restricted to this core zone during the 13th and 14th centuries. Based on the number of Oneota villages that have been identified, several distinctive localities have been delineated. I've shown that on the slide here in the lower left. These localities include groups along the shore of Lake Winnebago, Lake Butamore, Lake Winneconne, and Lake Poygan. Archaeologists have debated the relationship between the archaeologically defined late woodland and Oneota populations for decades. Basically, to quickly and shortly summarize this, there are two essential models. One is that Oneota migrated into eastern Wisconsin and displaced the local late woodland residents, whereas the other model stipulates that the late woodland residents transformed into the Oneota based on a dynamic social landscape and happenings outside the region. So that's really just kind of a very brief context that's really going to help us understand the importance of what we encountered at Lakeshore Avenue. But now I want to talk a little bit about our work on the Lakeshore Avenue project. I'm going to take you through very brief summary of kind of the work that we did out there, and then I'll get into our preliminary findings. So UWM was contacted by the city of Neenah to do some archaeological work as part of their study for the Lakeshore Avenue project. We knew at the time that, and of course, from what I just told you too, that there were numerous archaeological sites reported along Neenah Point. And in fact, there was a previously reported archaeological site. It was documented in the 1990s that essentially covered the entire Lakeshore Avenue project area, following along the shoreline of Lake Winnebago. And some grit tempered pottery had been observed along the shoreline, and that served to define the site. So our initial work, we conducted this in the summer. We went out and we looked at the Lakeshore Avenue project area to assess if there was any physical evidence of that site within the project area. So how we do this, and you may have seen us doing this in the summer, we essentially dig a series of small pits. They're placed about every 33, 35 feet or so. They're dug with a shovel, and we screen the dirt through a 1/4-inch hardware mesh. We recover artifacts. And so when we find artifacts, and then the types of artifacts we find and the quantities of artifacts, it gives us clues about the site that is here, first, whether or not the site is here, and some idea of the nature of the archaeological site. And what we found during this initial survey was quite remarkable, to be honest. So essentially, every single shovel test that we excavated produced artifacts. And if that wasn't enough, there were a couple other things that really, struck me, that we've got a fairly, significant and large archaeological site here. So in addition to the, material culture, we were finding the materials coming from a buried plow zone. And this buried plow zone was located under a shallow fill deposit. And I've got some pictures that show this in more detail later on. So there is anywhere from a couple inches to about a foot or more of fill that covered the former plow zone. So that would have been the surface that was exposed at the time that this was a farm field. And we were finding materials coming out of that plow zone, and then also from the intact soil beneath the plow zone. And if that wasn't enough, the material culture was quite remarkable as well. So from the survey work, we did identify grit tempered pottery, so that would tell us late woodland populations. We also found pottery tempered with crushed shell, telling us there were that there were Oneota populations here too. We also found worked shell and worked bone artifacts, which is not what you typically find at archaeological sites these days, given the amount of damage and plowing that has occurred, and not to mention collecting of sites. So we found worked shell, and I've shown some of that here, and then stone tools as well. So based on that work that we did, and working with the city and working with the Wisconsin Historical Society and the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources, we developed a mitigation plan to excavate a portion of the site within the Lakeshore Avenue project. Certainly the Lakeshore Avenue project would damage the archaeological site. So the mitigation that is undertaken to offset that damage is excavation of a portion of the site. So how this works is based on what we found during the survey. We selected areas to target for mitigation and archaeological excavation. And if you were out there when we were doing this, you kind of got a firsthand look at it. But what this looks like is using heavy equipment or a backhoe to strip off the disturbed fill deposit, and then carefully peel back that plow zone to the contact with the underlying subsoil. And at that contact zone, we're able to identify cultural features. And these cultural features, I've shown them in the slide here on the right. They appear as dark stains in the soil. And what these cultural features are is a physical remnant of a past activity. So it could be a cooking pit, it could be a storage pit, it could be a refuse pit. And a lot of times these features contain material culture. So the artifacts that you find from the features themselves, the spatial arrangement of the features, that is the type of evidence that archaeologists use to reconstruct activities that happened in the past and have an understanding of what we would come to know as this fairly large and extensive village site. So I wanted to show you kind of the stratigraphy, and I don't know if you can see my cursor. Hopefully you can. I have this slide here on the left that shows a profile of one of these excavation trenches. This actually is toward the south end of the project where the fill deposit was quite a bit deeper. But here you can see the layers of fill, so the banding of the dark and light soil, and then dark, light, a little bit darker. That's all the fill deposit. And then the dark band at the bottom, that's at buried plow zone. And then beneath that, you can see the lighter colored intact soil. And so right at that contact zone is what we were targeting to identify those cultural features. Once those cultural features are identified, we do very careful scientific mapping and excavation of those features. So the photograph on the right shows one of our archaeologists carefully exposing and mapping and documenting a nearly intact pottery vessel. And some of these other slides, they show the overview of these trenches with all of the features identified. Those are marked with all the pink pin flags, the mapping that we did, and then of course, screening the materials that we get from these features and recovering the material culture. Of course, the mitigation that we did in the archaeological excavations did identify a fairly large village site. And as we know, the places where people lived in the past were also places where people buried their ancestors. And working very closely with the Wisconsin Historical Society and the DNR and the tribes, we came up with a strategy to identify these very culturally sensitive features and preserve them in place to the greatest extent possible. To that end, part of our work involved stripping the fill off of the entire roadbed to identify all of these features. And so that work was done toward the end of the fall. Okay, so now I'm going to get into some of our results. And I must stress right now that where we are in the process, again, we did all this work in the fall. We're in the process of doing our laboratory inventory and analysis, and really trying to understand and interpret the site. So I will just preface this by saying that the results I present here are to be considered, preliminary indeed, and they may change.
Dr. Haas,
yes.
Is it possible for you to switch to presentation mode? Some participants are wanting larger
screen. Okay, so
that's possible.
Well, you really are asking a lot of me. It's like amazing just to even get to this point. So let me see, because I lost that whole Zoom thing. I lost the meeting control. So let me get rid of this. Good thing I don't have anything. So it was Alt Tab. Don't want that. I hope you all can see everything that I'm struggling with here.
I'm sorry, there was a
But you see what's
request.
happening, like the only thing I can think
I'll
is,
just go back and click on the presentation again, I guess.
I mean,
And then from current slide.
it's not like, I can't even get to that window. Oh, here, let me just give a short break here. We might not have a whole lot of time for questions. Okay, let's see. Okay, getting there. Okay, stop sharing. Oh dear God. Okay, so now you want me to do share screen. I am not seeing presentation mode.
Well, just go back to sharing your screen and the,
Yeah, if you go back into sharing your screen and then open your PowerPoint, it'll just be a setting in PowerPoint.
Okay.
Great. And then if you go down in the bottom,
Here?
in the bottom corner, right where that little slider is, it should be right. You're right on it there, I believe.
This thing, right?
Yeah.
How's that?
And then if you go up to display settings,
Oh my gosh.
I know it's
No, that's good. I'm glad. Thank you.
right there. I believe we want to see.
Do you want me to do that?
yes.
There we go. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, are we good again?
Yes, we're good. I'm sorry.
I'm glad that you said something instead of get to the end and then you're like, well, it was like a tiny thing.
We could still see it. It just was
We
a little
could.
bit smaller.
It was
Yes.
small. Okay.
Awesome.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, okay, well, now we're to the results, and that's good. I just wanted to check my notes and make sure I wanted to cover everything here. So what I wanted to start with, well, first of all, what you're looking at here on the left is a kind of a snapshot. So these are, we're going to get into by the numbers here, but all these dark spots are these cultural features that we identified and mapped, and then just some of the more what do you say, not typical artifacts from the habitation areas. So this is a worked shell artifact, potentially a comb, and then an example of one of these, cultural features. But we'll get more into that. Okay. Okay. So, but first, now the only way that I could do this is kind of twisting the map. So I just want to orient you right now. So basically I took Lakeshore Avenue and I flipped it to the right about 90 degrees. So we could put the entire Lakeshore Avenue on this slide here. And I don't know, can you guys see my cursor or no?
Yes.
You can, okay. So you can, so I just kind of, tipped that over. So that's the Lakeshore Avenue project area. All these little dark specks in there are features. And then where I've got the box, I just zoomed in on the box. So, Lake Winnebago is down here. Lake Winnebago is down here. So just, you can orient how I have this map. So for the mitigation part of the project, we looked at over 7,000 square feet, and we identified about 300 of these cultural features. Many of these cultural features we were able to actually preserve in place. For the monitoring part of the project, we investigated 51,000 square feet, which includes the entire roadbed of Lakeshore Avenue, as well as many of the driveway aprons. And this part of the project identified 831 features. So if you do the math with this, we looked at nearly 60,000 square feet, and we identified a whopping 1,100 cultural features. From the features that were excavated, we have inventoried over 80,000 artifacts. So it kind of just gives you a sense of the scale of the site and the project. In terms of the site, components, like who was living here and when, we have identified through the archaeological research that the primary occupation of the site, the most intensive occupation of the site, was during the late woodland period. So again, that's going to date between 8700 to 8200, and also during the Oneota period, which is about 80,000 to 1650. We did also, and those are extensive village type occupations. We also did find evidence of earlier woodland campsites, so not as intensively occupied, and those were a little bit earlier, from about AD, or from about 250 BC to 8400. So I'll talk briefly about the early and middle woodland, and then we'll get into the late woodland and Oneota. So we know that the initial occupation of the site area, for which we have the archaeological data, relates to the early part of the woodland period, what we term early and middle woodland. Use of the site by these early inhabitants were sporadic, and so people were likely living at this locale during part of the year, perhaps during the summer, and then traveling to other more interior areas during the fall and winter months. The archaeological evidence of this early occupation is relatively sparse, especially as compared to the later late woodland and Oneota components. So this slide just kind of shows the overall distribution of materials that we have identified as early woodland. So again, the pink triangles just show the features where we recovered evidence of earlier middle woodland artifacts. I've shown an example of an early woodland artifact here. It's a grit tempered, cord marked pottery sherd that has this real distinctive incised diagonal lines. It's real typical early woodland pottery that you find in this region. At least a couple features that we identified, and one shown on the slide here is a cooking pit that relates to the early woodland period. So I've shown that here, and then I've kind of put the black box around trench 15, which I'm going to show on this other slide, which kind of shows some of the challenges that we have in the interpretation of the site and what we are kind of working through right now. So in this next slide, so here we're zoomed in on trench 15, and I've shown here where the early and middle woodland features are demarked in this kind of pink box. So those 4 features, and most of those were cooking pits, and again some additional pottery. So the pottery shown here is a middle woodland sherd, again grit tempered with some decorations that indicates it relates to that middle woodland period. But the point I wanted to show here was the complicated archaeology that we have. So we have these early and middle woodland features, but it's also what we also have in this trench are features that relate to the later site components. So here in this trench, these relate to the Oneota occupation, and in fact we have evidence of at least two houses. So what we are in the process of doing now is trying to really analyze the site structure to identify what features we can relate to late woodland and what features we can relate to Oneota occupations. And as you can imagine, it is quite complicated. So I'm now going to address the late woodland component. So we know There's a late woodland component at the site based on the diagnostic artifacts, and I've shown some of them here. So these are all pottery vessels. There's on the left of the slide, Madison ware. These are, grit tempered sherds. We know they date to about 700 to 1000 AD. On the far right is Lobe punctate. It's a type of pottery vessel. Vessels of this type or this style typically date to about 650 to 800 AD. And then in the middle is an example of one of those collared wares. So those vessels that have the thickened band around the rim, and this point sawbull collard ware was manufactured between about AD 1000 and 1150. We know based on the quantities and types of late woodland material culture that this was a semi-sedentary village. Some of the house structures identified at the site relate to the late woodland component. Okay. The investigations also identified a fairly extensive Oneota Village dating to about 1350 to, or about AD 1000 to 1650. These dates are based on the distinctive Lake Winnebago trailed pottery. So I've shown some of those examples here. And again, this pottery was manufactured with the crushed shell tempered. Many other distinctive artifacts such as work bone and copper likely relate to the Oneota occupation. So when we start kind of mapping out at the site where we are finding Oneota and late woodland materials, and I've shown this on the slide here with the Oneota features that have yielded diagnostic Oneota materials shown in green and late woodland in pink, you get the sense that it is not a straightforward task. And again, I've zoomed in on one of the trenches, and again, we're finding kind of late woodland and Oneota in similar areas of the site. So one of our challenges is to kind of tease out the site structure that relates to each of these components. So I did mention earlier, one of the things that we do know we have at the site are houses. And in fact, we have identified at least 9. And so this is one of the reasons why I can say unequivocally that this is a very extensive village site. Again, we're looking at it. It could have been occupied over several hundred years, but we are fairly confident that we've got at least 9 houses out here. It is, as you can imagine, very difficult to identify these features, especially when we're looking at this narrow strip of Lakeshore Avenue. Almost certainly the site extends further inland. I would argue that it probably extends across the entirety of Neenah Point, but certainly into those front yards. So we're looking at kind of a sliver of the site, but I've zoomed in here on the north end of the site. And from the arrangement of post holes, so some of the features that we identified are remnants of posts. And from those patternings of the posts, and also how those posts relate to other features that may have been identified as cooking pits or storage pits or refuse pits, that helps us identify how these houses might have, might have been, arranged, size and shape. And so in this box in the north end, I've got 2 houses partially, delineated. Again, the lighter gray in here is what was excavated, so they probably go closer to a little bit closer to the lake in an area that we did not excavate. And just to emphasize that I'm not just seeing patterns of posts and making things up. We do know that late woodland and Oneota people and populations built a wide variety of houses. And so I've shown some examples of houses that have been identified at regional Oneota sites. So these are more of the oval wigwam type houses, but again, they might show a little clearer the patterning of post stains and other features that give us clues that a house was once located at a specific area. So it just shows that same slide again. In addition to houses, we're doing our best to identify functions of other features. And here, I zoomed in on an area in the northern part of the site that we're starting to identify feature functions. So the different colored features indicate how features likely functioned in the past. The orange features are storage pits, the yellow ones are cooking pits, and the green are refuse pits. And I'll kind of go through what these look like. So these cooking pits, and again, a lot of the cultural features may have been used for multiple purposes. So it may have started as a cooking pit and then was used later on as a refuse pit. Again, we're looking at a several hundred year time range here. But this is one that is that we have identified as a cooking pit. It has, we did find a lot of charred corn and corn cobs in this pit. There are other types of cooking pits that we have also identified. So the photo on the left is kind of a shallower cooking pit that was used and then used for cooking purposes, and then probably later used as a refuse pit. And then on the photo on the right shows a cultural feature that we identified as a cooking pit that was lined with limestone slabs. And those were a type of cooking, used as a type of cooking technology. And then we have identified roasting pits, which basically is another subset of a different type of cooking technology. These are recognized by basically being pretty full of rock that has been fire altered and cracked. And again, using those as that limestone lined pit was used as well, using the rocks as a heating element. So you'd heat up the rocks and place them in the pit to cook various types of foods. And we have also identified storage pits. So the storage pits are just what their name says. They're pits that were dug into the ground where they stored food items. And again, storage pits are typically recognized by being very, very deep. Something to keep in mind here, just with the nature of the site and with the fill deposit and the plow zone, we have identified features, but we're essentially looking at kind of the bottom half of the features. But we did identify at least several storage pits. The material culture, and again, this is all from the habitation areas of the site, is actually quite remarkable. Copper artifacts, so copper awls that's shown on the right. We have copper, fish hooks. So certainly, fishing was a site, activity. Worked bone that's shown on the photograph in the lower center. And then we did get a fairly large ground stone, and this would have been some type of, grinding stone, perhaps to grind corn or other types of seed plants. So, where we are now, as I mentioned earlier, so the field work and the excavation is done. That was complicated in itself, and now we are kind of in the laboratory phase of the work, and we hope to have our report out to the Wisconsin Historical Society and the city and the DNR towards the end of May. And I just want to kind of end with a few kind of final thoughts on this. So when we talk about what has been found beneath Lakeshore Avenue, so what we have found is a late prehistoric village site occupied by what is archaeologically recognized as two distinct groups. a late woodland population, and people of the Oneota tradition. Beneath Lakeshore Avenue is the evidence of a place where people lived their lives and buried their ancestors. We know that the time of this occupation likely ranged from AD 700 to perhaps as late as 1650. We did find evidence of earlier woodland occupations when the area was used as a seasonal camp. We did not, however, find evidence of the early historic mission or contact period items. Within Neenah Point and along Lakeshore Avenue, we have seen that significant archaeological deposits have remained mostly intact, preserved due to the placement of fill early on that has encapsulated and protected these archaeological materials. Based on our work along Lakeshore Avenue, as well as previous work in Kimberly and Riverside Parks, much more of this village site likely remains. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Haas. That was really interesting. I was taking notes the whole time.
Well, I'm sorry for the little glitches on the technology.
Oh, not a problem at all. It was just fascinating. There are a couple of questions. One of them is, what is the significance of the decorations on the pottery? And I'm guessing you could probably do a whole presentation on that alone, but if you could just maybe give like a quick overview.
Well, you are right, and I think the significance, it can mean a lot of different things. For archaeologists, I mean, we really use that, decoration type as a time indicator. So that's one of the most, sensitive, indicators to tell us kind of when pottery was being made, and that helps us date the site. And so that's what we were using here, because we don't have any direct radiocarbon dates from the site, but we know from the styles of pottery. Now, what the cultural meaning of the decoration, that is a more open-ended question, and I don't even know I don't even know if I would be in the right field to answer that. But certainly those, as anything, they would have meanings to the people that made them, for sure.
This is a question from Facebook. I think you can see who's
doing the plowing.
Yep.
Yeah, that would be the plow zone is from the Euro-American settlement of the area. So the people the Euro-Americans at first that came to that area and farmed the land. Now, and that to a certain extent, jumbled up the artifacts. But again, for the Lakeshore Avenue site and other sites, we're finding remnants of those, cultural features that have remained, intact. With that said, we do know that the Oneota were farmers, and there is, in some areas, we do find evidence, not from Lakeshore Avenue, but it wouldn't be it's within the realm of possibility that somewhere on Neenah Point that we could find evidence of garden beds, for sure.
Here's a question on my phone. Were the woodland artifacts at the same depth as the Oneota?
Basically, yes. So, again, because part of the site was disturbed by the prior plowing, we peeled that off, and then we're looking at that, contact zone to identify the features. So basically, yes. I wish they weren't.
Here's another question. What would the lakeshore itself have looked like at this time period?
That is a good question. We could probably figure that out, but I don't recall exactly how many feet the lake level rose when the dam was put in. But, it was so certainly the lakeshore, the lake level's higher now. So the shoreline would have been further out, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. That's one of the things that even early European writings talk about, the fact that Lake Winnebago was very marshy,
right,
and also was a place where Native American communities were harvesting wild rice.
For sure, yes.
Once a report is given to the Wisconsin Historical Society and the city, what happens?
That's it. That's kind of sad, but that's how it works. I mean, that's, we turn in the, report, and, that's pretty much the end of the project. So I'm certain that the research that we've done for Lakeshore Avenue, but also, and then also the other archaeological research done, and for Neenah Point, and hopefully it'll spur further research. I mean, that's the hope. So
will that report then be available at some point to the public as well, as it becomes the property of the city? Can the city
yes, yeah, it becomes, yeah, there will be, yes, there would be a public version.
Okay, great.
Yep.
Here's a question off of Facebook. What most surprised you about the site, and or what you found? I know I keep asking you that same question. It's probably hard to answer.
No, it's actually not hard to, this one's not hard to answer. I guess well, first of all, that it extended under Lakeshore Avenue. It was, we, suspected, after we, okay, let me back up. This project had many surprises. I think the first one was when we excavated all the shovel tests, and every single shovel test was positive, and the types of materials that we were getting. It's just not, that's not typical. Typically you do a shovel testing, you get one or two positive shovel tests, you get a few pieces of like stone chips. So that in itself was, not typical. Finding the materials so well, preserved underneath Lakeshore Avenue was, surprising to a certain extent, that stuff remained so well, preserved. So I'll give the top two.
Here's an interesting one. Were there any effigy mounds found?
We did not find any during our research on Lakeshore Avenue. However, when the early archaeologists in the 1900s, when they did studies on Doty Island, a number of effigy mounds have been identified on Doty Island, and I believe there are some that are still extant. In fact, I know there are some that are still out there, so and protected.
Why didn't the woodland culture extend to northern Wisconsin?
It did. It did.
Okay.
They were all over Wisconsin in different forms.
Here's one last question, and then I will stop asking questions.
Okay.
Is there any idea what the population was in the area at the time? Can you ever figure that out based on things you find?
You can get a sense of it. So I don't even want to harbor a guess. I mean, a couple of things that we'll look at are the number of houses, and the size of the houses. That may provide some clues. I know some of the historic villages were there. There's actually historic documentation, so they may provide some idea of the size of those villages.
Have you done, I think you already mentioned about carbon dating. Did you do carbon dating on anything?
We have not done anything.
Okay. Well, I guess we're gonna wrap it up then, but I appreciate your presentation so much. We really learned a lot, and I would encourage everybody to continue keeping informed on this, and especially as the report comes out and becomes available, you'll be able to review that for yourself and find out more about it. But thank you so much. Thank you for all the work you did. I think it's really important for our community to understand the fact that we are not the first people to have lived here, and we will not be the last. So Thank you for all of your work, and we really appreciate your presentation tonight.
All right. Yeah. Thank you for having me too. It was wonderful. So,
Great. Thank
Okay.
you.
all right. Take care. Bye.
Good night, everybody.